got some laughter at the beginning, and then it just went silent, brutally silent for the majority of it. I mean, I felt like unzipping my skin and just rolling out of there because it was brutal.
Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Culturally Jewish. I'm your host, David Sklar.
And I'm your other host, Ilana Zakon.
Well, join us as we explore Jewish art, culture, and identity here in Canada. This week, we are joined by Alison, Darcy, and Joseph Shragge, co-creators of the theater company Scapegoat Carnivale.
Mama always wanted me to be a doctor, but I became an artist and that really shocked her. Now I'm interviewing people in the biz, pros and newish, but all of them are artists and they're culturally Jewish.
Now, Alana, I know this was your idea. You wanted to bring them both on for this week. Why?
Well, ever since I moved back to Montreal, I wanted to reconnect with a lot of people in the theater community, and Alison was a friend and colleague of mine, and we reconnected and very quickly got into super interesting conversations around Jewish identity and arts, and then she introduced me to Joe, and the three of us got together and had even more interesting conversations where we talked about like Middle Eastern politics and, are Jews white and all these sorts of topics that some of which we get into on this episode. And very recently they put on a show, Vertip, which was a puppet show exploring antisemitism. And I had the privilege of being able to come sit in on one of their dress rehearsals. And then Alison and Joe and I had some pretty interesting conversations following their premiere about the audience reaction to a show that was, I guess, controversial to them, especially for a French audience because the show was in French. And I thought it would just be such an interesting first conversation for us to have on our new podcast.
And for those people who don't know, Alison Darcy has been a professional actor in theater, film, and TV since the 80s and has been directing theater professionally since 2000. She is the co-founder and co-artistic director of Scapegoat Carnivale, an award-winning theater company in Montreal. And Joseph Shragge is a Montreal-based playwright who is also the co-artistic and co-founder of Scapegoat Carnivale. His award-winning plays have been performed at the Centaur Theatre, the Siegel Center, Théâtre La Licorne, among many others. Enjoy.
Je m'appelle Vertip. J'habite dans le sous-sol du centre communautaire sur la rue Saint-Urbain. Chaque année, j'organise et je dirige le castelet de Noël.
Thank you both for joining us today. Very briefly, we would love to know how you both ended up in the arts and more specifically in theater. And Alison, why don't we start with you?
Well, I was kind of born into it, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
In that way that I'm saying unfortunately because technically that would make me a Nepo baby, which I'm not very pleased about considering I think the idea of Nepo baby makes you think that you get like a lot of advantage from it, whereas I've managed to maintain my foothold in a very, very small community and the Anglophone theater scene within Montreal. So yes, I'm a Nepo baby, but it didn't get me there very far.
Just while we're on that, for the people who don't know you, Alison, can you just tell us a bit about your dad? Because I think it's just really interesting for our audiences.
Yeah, I'm both my parents. My parents came over from England. My father's originally from South Africa, of Eastern European Ashkenazi descent, and my mother is British and Anglican, and they came over to teach at the National Theatre School, and then they ended up starting the Centaur Theatre together in Old Montreal, which turned into a really big, prominent kind of theatre for this community. And then my mother, after having my brother and I, started Geordie Productions, which is
I didn't know that.
A prominent theater for young audiences, and has created a network all over Quebec, all the way up into Alert Bay.
Geordie is where I got my start touring theater.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
And Joseph, is there any nepotism running throughout your family? How did you get involved?
Not really nepotism. My parents were social workers. I don't think they did much for me in the arts other than give me a healthy discouragement from going into them. But despite that, I went to Concordia. I did a degree in English and creative writing, and I wanted to be a writer. I did a bunch of playwriting classes. When I graduated, I tried being a writer, and I met Alison, and we staged a play that I'd written in a very, very lo-fi kind of way, but it was a really magical experience. So we kept doing theater, and I met the English theater community, and I just sort of stuck around doing it.
Amazing.
So I was the gateway drug.
That's great.
As it tends to be with theater, you dip your toes into it and then you can never get out of it.
So I want to go back to Vertip for a second, which the show that you just put on, which I had the pleasure of seeing in open dress rehearsal. We're going to go deeper into the weeds on the show in a second, but that show is a puppet show which tackles anti-Semitism, and I know that it's not the first show that you've put on that has a Jewish theme. Was there an intention when you created the company that you would explore some of these Jewish themes, or did that just happen unexpectedly or organically?
We weren't thinking about Jewish identity directly. I think there was always a shared sensibility between Alice and I that reflects in some ways an inherited culture, a sense of humor, an absurdity that I associate somewhat with Jewish writers.
Which Jewish writers?
Kafka.
I could so see that in your work.
You know, it's funny. I just read Mordecai Richler for the first time.
Which book did you read?
The Apprenticeship of Duty Kravitz. Have you heard of it?
I haven't read it either.
I know.
I should.
Oh, I had to read Duddy Kravitz in high school. It was like a big part of the curriculum.
I guess they cut that out.
Montreal high schools. I guess.
Well, we all went to Montreal high school, but go on.
Yeah, that's true. No, Joe and I, we definitely relate to each other in a slightly kind of Jewish way. I don't know if that's a way to express that, but it like we have a shorthand and a kind of an understanding of, I think, the ironies of life and the ridiculousness, the surreal and the sadness, and I think we connect on that level. So
right.
I feel like I'm able to understand his work in an authentic way.
So, now's a great time. I want to talk a bit about the show Vertip. Can you tell our listeners and myself, I wasn't able to see it, what that show is about?
It was inspired because of a newspaper article that Joseph saw about the ice festival that happens in Quebec City every year. And I guess one year there was a sculpture of a Jewish character, but it was, heavily, bearded, crouched over with the nose and a bag of shekels. And no one said anything about it. And people just kept walking by until finally a couple from Montreal, I believe, saw it and said, hey, that's really kind of an anti-Semitic depiction. It was revealed by the creators, who were Eastern European, that this was a character from the Vertip, which is a style of puppetry that is prominent all over Eastern Europe. And the character of the Jew, or Zyhd, was, a famous character. And they didn't think of it as anti-Semitic, just as who he was. And of course, as you get deeper into the tradition, you see, they also have the the Roma character, which they refer to as the gypsy, and, a bunch of other kind of symbols that are rather uncomfortable. Those ice sculpture makers went back to Eastern Europe very, flummoxed by why we would have an issue with this, and this inspired Joseph. In 2011, he was asked to write a piece for the Urban Tales Project, which happens at the Centaur Theatre. It's an English version of Contes Urbains. And it's a kind of a Christmas time event where different writers will write monologues to be performed. And they all have kind of like a slightly dark tinge to them. So Joe wrote this piece about Vertip, which was performed by Andreas Apergis and directed by Harry Stanjowski. The story was about a man who lives in the basement of a kind of community center and has come from Eastern Europe and has inherited this puppet box theater of the Vertip from his family and all the puppets inside it. And every year does this kind of puppet show for Christmas, but that this year he's not doing it because something has happened. And what you discover is that what happened is that the Jewish character, Zyhd, started shaking his bag without him and demanding money. And he's kind of terrorized by this puppet who's constantly demanding money, and he thinks that the puppet's going to ruin the show, and it's going to be a national embarrassment. But I mean, you have to remember, this man is living in a basement alone, doing these puppet shows for nobody, and like his stage manager is the elderly woman who lives upstairs who takes care of the cafeteria, and she keeps trying to tell him to stay in the house and stop bothering people. So you get an understanding that his mental stability is not quite there. But yes, he becomes more and more obsessed with this puppet demanding money, that he decides the only way he can deal with it is to get the Cossack puppet to kill him. And so then there's an attempt there, but of course the Cossack is too drunk, and he ends up disguising himself as a Jewish person to take over the role. I don't know if you want to hear the ending. I don't know if I want to give it away or not. But
Don't. Yeah, let's see if it continues on for a tour. But the way you're describing it, it does make me think of almost like Schwarze Pete, Black Pete, where in certain segments, was that the inspiration or was that the idea behind it?
No, Schwarze Pete, which is just for those who don't know, is like the apprentice to Santa Claus in Eastern Europe, or Sinterklaas, and he is supposed to be a chimney sweep, but he very much looks like a person in blackface, and people really kind of acknowledge. Some people acknowledge that no, he was not a chimney sweep. He was a slave. He was Santa's slave. So actually, this is from the Vertip tradition as well. But every country in Eastern Europe kind of has their own characters of the cultural puppets, and so that one features heavily in Holland, but not in. Well, we were looking kind of more at the Ukraine and that area, just because that's also where our heritage is from and where our actor is from. Our lead actor is actually Ukrainian.
Oh wow, that's so.
Mm-hmm. So we wanted to make sure that we were speaking from places of knowledge, and of our own heritage.
And so, Joe, when you were writing this piece, because I feel like I just want to put the disclaimer over it, as the three of us have talked about in real life, that the show is kind of making a statement about this issue, not condoning it, but making like a social mirror, almost like holding up the mirror to the audience. As you were writing the show, knowing that people might take away different things from it, were there any initial worries that came up for you, or any blocks during the writing that made you want to do something else? Like, how did you push through that, if so?
Well, it's interesting because it was written in 2011, and it's funny how much the culture has changed since then. I think it was
drastically.
It was definitely following the influence of like Jonathan Safran Foer or Sacha Baron Cohen, where there's a way of joking about how Jews are, how anti-Semitic people talk about Jews, or to be more precise, a casual anti-Semitism that is very easy to make fun of, and that often comes from another culture. And I think looking at the piece today, our challenge was, how do we, one, deal with the fact that people are far more sensitive to the depiction of stereotypes, and two, how do we not point the finger at an entire culture and ridicule them, And that really became a concern, especially after the invasion of the Ukraine. I really had a few long nights of the soul and thought, are we just making fun of Eastern Europeans? Are we especially making fun of Ukrainians? Our actor's Ukrainian. He's currently, his apartment is now a place for refugees coming in and out. There's a horrible, horrible war. It's not really the time to criticize. And so that tension really changed the piece.
And interestingly enough, because the monologue was written in 2011, but we decided to make an adaptation of it to create a puppet show. Only in the last couple of years, and so even within the last couple of years, all of these dynamics have changed, and us translating the material into an actual puppet object and seeing it and touching it rather than just hearing about it also created a massive impact that we had to reckon with in the space, because seeing an anti-Semitic representation physically can be a lot more kind of traumatic than just hearing a depiction of one. And so that's something we had to negotiate to the last minute. I mean, at the very last minute, I actually cut an entire puppet that I felt was just too much.
Oh, interesting.
So you actually saw that puppet, but other people have not seen.
I won't say anything.
So what is it that you think about? What does puppetry then give it, as opposed to doing a performer or an actor discussing and talking about anti-Semitism or dealing with these things? What does the puppet provide or remove or take away that you can maybe more safely explore these ideas?
Well, it was very interesting because I think on the one hand, the minute we had an object, it created a much greater tension. To actually see a stereotyped object as opposed to hear about it in passing definitely was like, oh my God, what are we doing? Because it's so uncomfortable. At the same time, there was an opportunity to show a person's relationship with a puppet and to be able to stage in some ways a reconciliation or a change that was material and tangible come over the puppet. So there was all sorts of opportunities that came up. I think the thing we had to go through was to be like, oh my God, this is like creating a lot more tension in the room, but there's also the opportunity in theater to resolve that tension. And I think that's where all the cathartic possibilities are. And, you know, a puppet isn't just a puppet. It's always a pas de deux with the puppeteer. So when you think of it as a metaphor, it's like there's the puppeteer and the puppet, and that relationship becomes so much more live and interesting and complex when you see it.
Oh, 100%.
The whole purpose of the story is to talk about the symbology, the iconography of casual racism, and so to actually see the symbol is actually very important, because it is a visual symbol that they're discussing. They're not talking about having people saying things. They're talking about seeing people doing things, which are anti-Semitic movements, or caricatures that you would see visually.
Right.
So, yeah.
I really want to talk a bit about the audience reaction. I know we ran into each other after you'd done, I think, one show, and I found what you said so fascinating. So if you can just retell that story that you told me about that first show, and then I'm so curious to hear how the rest of the shows were received.
Okay. Well, we were sitting in the back row, and we saw all the international puppet people come in, because we previewed at a huge puppet festival in Montreal, and we'd never been to the festival before. We're not actually a puppet company, and we're Anglophone. So the fact that we were doing a French show with puppetry and premiering at this festival was pretty intense. And it was also our first time in front of an audience of more than 5 people. And everyone was very nervous, including our actor, and we had been working up to the last minute. So it was all a bit intense. And then the sight lines were terrible, and so people couldn't see a bunch of the show. But also, at the last minute, Joseph and I made a decision to do a voiceover introduction saying, the show has moments of anti-Semitism, like a trigger warning. And I think that was a mistake, because I think everyone got ready to see something about the Holocaust, or, something really dark and upsetting. And so they were not in the mood to laugh. And the piece we've done is actually very light. It's really about casual racism. It's about puppets, about whether or not we can keep the beauty of the folkloric stories without all the problematic elements. Can we separate them and keep these things alive, rather than banishing everything and banishing all the people who ever touched it, And so these are very complex things, especially for an audience of non-Jewish people, which is primarily what we were finding here in Quebec on the French side. So yeah, what happened was we got some laughter at the beginning, and then it just went silent. And it was brutally silent for the majority of it. And then suddenly when we had the ending, which I don't want to ruin, but is funny and emotional, then we got all the laughter back again, and then the warm coos, from the audience. And we were, I felt like unzipping my skin and just rolling out of there because it was brutal. But it's interesting because with every performance after that, we were then bringing it to people who were not intimidated by the subject matter, and the laughter started happening and rolling in. And by the end, and still by the end, we also had a French audience, but they were really engaged and laughing the whole way through and not afraid. And I think some of that also might have had to do with, the performance relaxing and getting more engaged, but also we changed that pre-show conversation to say, hi, this show has been created by Ashkenazi Jews and Eastern Europeans, and in both of our cultures, we use humor to look at tragedy or at things that make us uncomfortable. So we invite you to laugh with us.
Okay.
At this, and I think it helped a lot.
So
that's a very interesting thing. And so much about trigger warnings too. Sometimes, there's been a whole debate in our community about what do they provide, what do they take away? Are you revealing and prepping the audience for this stuff? And it seems like in your case, maybe that was detrimental to the show to sort of say, this is a show and there's serious issues of anti-Semitism or anything else. So now be prepared and get ready to deal with this serious subject matter, as opposed to the levity that it seems like you wanted to provide. Now, I'm curious about another puppet show going on at the same time, which was The Incredible Secret of Blackbeard, L'Incroyable Secret de Barbe Noire, where it actually did get canceled because it's a black performer with what people have described as doing blackface. Now, why was that show? I'd be curious to hear from you. Why do you think that got so much negative press and feedback and was eventually pulled, whereas your show may be dealing with similar issues with the stereotype of what people might call Jew face, was able to continue on?
Just to be clear, like his show was temporarily canceled in Beaconsfield, as much as I can understand. It did have this huge response in the media, and people arguing about it. And that really put the fear into us, obviously, because we were doing something parallel. And someone even said, if a Jewish person did this, they would be canceled right away. And when I read that, I didn't breathe for about 2 minutes. And everyone in the rehearsal room, we came in the next day just pale. We're like, what are we getting ourselves into? And I can't really speak too much to the other piece. I don't really know the iconography well enough. But from our perspective, I think the piece is really about that the subject matter, and by the end, if people can make it to the end, I think we give a strong resolution and a hopeful resolution, and I think that might be the difference, is that it's our subject, whereas with him, it was one of his puppets. In his defense, or what he said in his own words, it was a self-portrait.
Right. Yeah, I read that.
Also, I would add that while his character really did look like a typical blackface, even though it was a self-portrait, whereas our puppet was not what we would call Jew face. Like, the puppet did not look like a representation of a Jew. He just had a bag of shekels. So it was the object that he had with him and the movement of his character that made him a representation. So I think visually, just seeing the puppet on its own did not
Sure.
generate the kind of shock that the other puppeteers puppet. But it was fascinating because everyone came out in support of him after that was pulled. Like the whole the theater community, the puppet community, all the founding bodies, everyone was in support of him because he was doing his work about his heritage and his life. And I think it was one of the few times when the more kind of socially or quote unquote woke kind of intention was actually pushed back against.
This is making me think about like the wider issue. David kind of brought this up before about, sometimes we give these trigger warnings and then there's a big conversation in our industry about representation and diversity and inclusion. And it made me wonder, if your show had not been written by Jews and it had been put on, would that make a difference or not, in your opinion? For the world, not for you, like for audiences, do you think that they would care one way or the other?
That brings up a bigger conversation that I'm still having with myself about whether or not, because so many Ashkenazi Jews are considered white people, that we are not kind of within the protected shell of the trends towards equality and diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when we hired Sasha, he said if it hadn't been written by a Jewish person, he would not go near it. And even the fact that it was written by a Jewish person, he was still quite, until we finally got the run going and really understood the show, apprehensive about what he was depicting as a non-Jewish person.
This is making me think a bit about a speaker who came to the Siegel Center recently. I'm in the Jewish Arts Mentorship Program there, and every month they bring in a different speaker. And he came in from New York, and he's a Black Jew, converted, but he's ordained as a rabbi, but he's also a theater creator. I'm just trying to find his name. It'll come to me in a second. But we had a really interesting conversation about representation, and he was really pushing us all to think about how we can become more specific within the different strains of our Judaism, even if we are Ashkenazi. And that was something that I had never really heard anyone highlight before, of like, we're not just one white, like, I mean, I don't mean this word in the way that I said it, but I was going to say whitewashed. It's not just one brushstroke. Like, Ashkenazi often is portrayed in the media as like one thing. Maybe you have like a New York accent and you look a certain way and you talk a certain way or whatever. But Ukrainian Jews and Polish Jews and Russian Jews all had very different traditions, and some of them had some various versions of language that they would speak. And I know that from talking to my grandfather, when he grew up, there was a lot of tension between communities in Montreal that were all Ashkenazi. And I feel like that was a really good reminder of like, oh, in my shows that I create, how can I get more specific? And I think that it sounds like you really did with Vertip, about making it about a specific heritage. You didn't just say this is just, a brushstroke. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Well, I think also because it was a collaboration with a Ukrainian artist who had firsthand experience of this puppet tradition, it helped have a kind of a specificity to really look in detail about it. And I really value that it did become a collaborative effort with people who have different knowledge and different perceptions of it.
I question the kind of desire to become more specific, actually, in some ways, and in other ways I don't. Because, in the ways I don't, I think I understand why we would want some specificity, specifically when we're talking about the ways that Jews are being represented. Because, like, for example, just in terms of skin color, I am definitely, you would look at me, she's a white person. Like, I don't look anything other than a complete white person. But if you look at Joseph, who has the exact same, or not exact same, but very similar heritage to me, he will sometimes be stopped at the airport, and, get a lot of those, no, but where are you really from kind of questions. And so I think there's an acknowledgement there that needs to be had to understand that, yes, in a culture that is a white supremacist culture, that we all live in, different Jewish people are having very different experiences based on something like that.
I want to thank you both for coming on Culturally Jewish. It was a really informative, wonderful discussion, not only about your show and your work, but also about some of these greater questions, which we will have to definitely leave a pin in as we progress with the show to ask these very important questions. Thank you both for coming on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This is a great conversation.
Now we're going to take a few minutes to chat a little bit about what we've been up to in the industry, since David and I are both multidisciplinary artists in this vast milieu of the entertainment world. David, what are you working on these days? Auditioning more? I know you are just a dinosaur. Please tell me more.
I was Tyrell, the raptor. So we were touring for a couple of weeks across Western Canada, as far as Winnipeg, and then the other side we went to Vancouver Island. It was great. There is talk that there
So
may be.
lucky.
It was. I was so happy to be in and around Victoria. The weather was great. There was no snow. I got to spend a bit more time visiting and catching up with some friends in Vancouver once the tour was over. I think that's my retirement dream, is to escape the winter of Calgary and head to Victoria and live out there as a retiree.
Oh, that is a retirement place, yeah.
It's where most Calgarians go to die, sadly,
Oh, really?
but true.
It's so beautiful.
It really is. And I know you lived in Vancouver for many years.
Yeah.
And you got
I've
to
been
do
to
a lot of
Victoria a
theater
few
there.
times.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's a lot of theater there. Up
There
and
is.
down
There's
the
a pretty
coast.
there's a pretty good scene. Vancouver is probably like the hub for theater in BC. That's where it's kind of like the Toronto of BC, where they'll cast a lot of shows for small parts of the province out of Vancouver. But they have a lot of like little communities alongside the different parts.
Like
Very cool.
Chemainus does a lot of musical theater, I know.
Yeah, they do.
What have you been up to recently, Alana?
Too much, which
okay.
I should not be complaining. A lot of writing. I just started booking some more voice work again. It's been very, very quiet since the fiscal new year. But I'm going to be doing an ad for Buick, which is my second time doing an ad for them later this week. And then I just found out, like literally 5 minutes ago, that I'm going to be doing another ad next week. So I'm very glad to be able to squeeze in some voiceover before Passover. But other than that, I'm writing a play through the Jewish Arts Mentorship Program at the Siegel Center, which we can talk about more another time because that'll take up a whole episode.
Definitely.
And I'm working on a whole bunch of other little projects. So it's just been a lot of me at the computer, which is not my ideal way of spending my time. I'm definitely craving being in a rehearsal room again, but I trust that the time will come.
You know, Alana, there is so much there to talk about, but you did mention the word fiscal, which kind of gave me a bit of a trigger right there, because this is what I'm dealing with as we speak, dealing with my taxes as a self-employed artist. It is the bane of my existence. I don't know how you feel. I don't know if you do your own taxes, but
No,
this is the most...
definitely not.
I do my own taxes, and this is so frustrating because we have so many different jobs that are like T4A
Hire an
slips.
Accountant. That's
No,
how you do
I had
it.
I had a terrible experience one year with an accountant
Get a better one.
who screwed me over, cost me thousands of dollars that
get
I
a
owed
better
to the
one.
government, maybe. But I like learning about how to do my taxes, and this is what I'm dealing with this month and for the next couple of weeks. So it's just been
sounds
very
like-
stressful.
This sounds like a problem you've put onto yourself unnecessarily. But anyway, I'm horrible with numbers. I have too many incomes, so I have never done my own taxes, and I probably never will.
You know what? Maybe at some point we should bring on like a tax expert onto this show to talk about how artists.
So boring.
No, it's actually once you get the hang of it, it becomes really exciting because then you know what you can deduct and what you can get away with and what you
I
can't.
know how to. I know what to deduct. That I don't have an issue with. Cool. Well, I'm glad that we got our little catch up. It has been a bit of a stretch since we've caught up in podcast land. And before we wrap up the show, we're going to share an event that we're excited about that's going on in Canada right now, or that is about to go on. David, do you have any art-related event that you are excited about?
Yes, happening right now at Theatre Calgary is a show called Forgiveness, and it's based on the acclaimed 2018 Canada Reads winning novel by Mark Sakamoto. I saw it for opening night. It is a tremendous, epic show. It's basically a memoir of Sakamoto's grandparents and their experiences during the Second World War. Mark's maternal grandfather was actually a soldier, a Canadian soldier, who spent years in a prisoner of war Japanese camp, as well as his grandmother. His paternal grandmother was one of the thousands of Japanese Canadians who was interned by the Canadian government during the Second World War. It was a tremendous feat. They started in Vancouver. They're ending this week in Calgary. If you're in and around the neighborhood, please check it out. It's a wonderful powerhouse of a show.
Cool.
Alana, what's going on? What do you want us to check out?
I'm going to do a little plug for Prayer for the French Republic at the Siegel Center, which is opening on April 23rd. I had the opportunity to read the script, and I cried probably 4 times reading it. I'm really, really excited to see what they do with it. It's written by Joshua Harmon, who wrote Bad Jews, which I know, David, you were in a production of in Calgary a bunch of years ago. But this play takes place in France, and it goes between 1944, post-Holocaust, and then modern day. And you see the same family, you see their ancestors and the present day family dealing with a lot of the same issues around anti-Semitism. It is a dark comedy, so there's a lot of humor to it, but it really punches you in the gut with everything that's been going on in France over the last bunch of years. I think this is a really important show for people to check out. So be sure to go to the Segal Center website and look for A Prayer for the French Republic if you live in Montreal. Culturally Jewish is hosted by me, Ilana Zakon, and David Sklar. Michael Freeman is our editor and producer. Our theme music is by Sarah Siegel-Lazar. To support this show and everything else the CJN does, head to the cjn.ca/donate to make a monthly donation. Thanks for listening.